And we will start with 72 minutes of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. I have received appointments for absence from Councillor Baxter.
I think Councillor Essay might be late. She's
Oh, yes, that's right. You're absolutely right, Chancellor. So it might be late. And looking at the minutes of the previous meeting, on the 21st of February, we now sign those as accurate. On the accuracy of the minutes.
Yes, it's to do with basically whether the actions have been followed.
So not on the accuracy of the minutes. So first of all, I want to do the accuracy of the minutes. Can I sign that? Yes, I can.
Agreed.
Brilliant. As a supplementary, we all would like to know.
Apologies for putting the wrong category. The question was a simple one to governance. Have the actual points been followed up? Yes. And I've been put on the actual track? Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on to paper A5, which is an update on the consultation for. Oh, no, hang on. Are we going on what order are we going in?
Yes, fine.
We're going 5 first. But altering the order of the paper. I hope that's all right with everybody. So we'll go to paper A5. Please come and join us. So this is a very important part of what this committee does. Looking at progress on Grenfell, particularly Grenfell support. And this gives us an update in the consultation for future of Grenfell support. So, do you want to introduce it, Elizabeth? Who wants to start?
Well, I suppose I can introduce it and help give you the details. I suppose it's an ongoing consultation, and the most important thing is the way that it's being conducted by Helen, that we've gone out and we've asked people about how they wish the services that we're delivering to continue or be altered, etc. And then we had a huge amount of feedback, 2,500 people, from 1,500 children, from bereavement survivors to people who live in the vicinity of the tower. And then you go back again and say, well, we had drop-ins and things for 98 people. Say, okay, well, this is what we think you heard, is this right? So that people also hear opinions from other people, so you're not in a void. And then there was the next stage, which is saying, okay, well, now we've heard, what does this mean? And beginning to put models together, which is where I think you are now. And then there'll be a further stage when we then can say, well, these are the models which are developed and we need to go back out again. And then it'll come to you, and then it'll come to us. And hopefully that's almost going to be a year or 3/4 of a year, because it's really important that we get the next stage right and the next 4 years. And actually, we've just been, I've just been talking to someone who was bereaved, and he was saying how helpful it has been, this coming and going and reiterating, and it's not. So when, sometimes when you think about consultations, you think about your tick box. Okay, so what have you heard? Right, fine, bang, this is what we're doing. Whereas this really has been a completely iterative process, because we really do want to get it right. And you can't get it right if you just suddenly click your fingers. You need to really figure out what people are asking, and then try and mould the future with. So that's it for me. And Callum will be able to. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Callum.
Yeah, thank you, councillors. So I think the paper provides an update since the last paper came in December, which gave a position halfway through or 3/4 of the way through phase one. It tries to set out where we are with that and provides summary data and looks forwards. I think it would be fair to say that the consultation is a complex consultation.
Yeah.
It's a difficult consultation for people to be involved in. I think partly because it's time has passed where lots of people feel the programme and the way that we've consulted hasn't been right up until now. And for some people, I think seeing opportunities that are available to shape services, I think it naturally makes people question why they didn't feel this was available originally. And I think also it's reflecting on the council's continued role in these consultations. So although we've been, I feel privileged to have had the number of people who've chosen to spend the time that they have with us in meetings and to share really detailed emotional feedback with us. We don't, it's not lost on us the challenge it is to actually report that through to the council, even 6.5 years on. And we valued having both the support of stakeholders, of key community leaders, and also the external scrutiny team to ensure that the process feels as fair as possible. There's still a fair long way to go and some challenging decisions to be made, and our commitment is to try and do so in as restorative and trauma-informed way as possible.
Thank you very much. I certainly think it's been an interesting process, and I'll come back to that later, but I'm going to turn to the committee first, and I'm going to work around that way, if that's all right. Claire.
Great, thank you very much. I would have to agree with what Elizabeth has said. It's that this is very different from a lot of other consultations that there have been. This is a situation where the council has been entrusted to deliver a programme and to deliver the consultation as part of the global support agreement. So I just would like to also thank the external scrutiny partners. Perhaps there may be a correlation there in terms of how good this consultation has been, but it has had that extra level of scrutiny, which I think is really important. And also to thank the lawyers who ensured that that was in place. There were a couple of points raised at the recent meeting with Michael Gove around the inclusiveness. And I do understand it's been very difficult to reach people, especially after the journey of the last 6 years. And I think there was a question raised about digital inclusion as well. So it's not without its changes. But I do think, from what I've seen, because I've attended some of the drop-ins, that the people who have attended and shared their views have actually found the conversation itself to be quite healing. And that, I think, is hats off to Callum and Joe for the way it's been delivered. I wanted to also just sort of bring up with this latest phase that we're in, the way that the questions are being asked. I mean, it's a really sort of mammoth task bringing together all different variety of views. And a lot of what's been mentioned has been to do with housing and health, which may or may not be core statutory services anyway. But I think I just want to exercise a note of caution. It's really important how the questions are asked. So what I saw was people asked, do you think that housing or health should be part of this money? Yes or no? And what I saw was mostly people said no. But then what was presented was some really great ideas for improving housing and health, costed. And of course, because they're great ideas, people are not going to say, no, we don't want those. So if you remember when we used to have gas and electric people knocking on our doors all the time saying, do you want to save money on your bill? It's framed in such a way that you're not going to say no. And I just really want to make sure that going forward, it's not being shaped by the way that the questions have been asked. And another just note of caution I wanted to mention was about the language, talking about how do we target the most affected or who needs it most, because there has been a journey to date so far where it's been quite damaging in the way it's been exclusionary for people. That is, I think, still a wound. So when we say It shouldn't be either or, basically. It should be people who have needs. We acknowledge that some people's needs are going to be greater. We acknowledge that some people's needs are going to be different. But it shouldn't be, we want to target it to who needs it most, because that's a very vague way of doing it. It could be the one person that needs it most, or it could be the 1,500. So that's sort of around the language. And then finally, on page 621, 6.6, where we're talking about voluntary and community sector partners. We're talking about the transition and exit of what they've been delivering, but I wonder whether they have useful learning to input from the last 6 years about what has worked, what they've found has worked, and what they've found be recommended or done differently. So that's just a suggestion. But thank you.
Thank you for some interesting observations and first-hand observations as well. So thank you for that. Lucy, have you got any questions?
Just two small points, but I also just wanted to say how reading this in terms of being involved in other consultations, I feel very proud by how this has been done, because you can tell that's in the document, and also there's a lot of honesty in that, which isn't always, so it just felt very balanced, and yeah, well done. I think mine was just on 4.7, where you talk about how, because of the sort of extent of this consultation, you're not expecting many people to participate maybe in future phases, and just that might be for a number of reasons, but how we maybe try, and I don't know if there's a reason for that. I know you state here that it's maybe it doesn't go as in depth as this usually in council consultations, but how we can ensure we do have answers coming in the stages.
Yeah, thank you, councillors. And yeah, on 4.7, what we're trying to acknowledge is, particularly for the bereavement survivors and for children and young people, we had really good response rates. I think Councillor Simmons is right. For the immediate community, the response rate wasn't as good as proportion as we might have hoped it would have been. But therefore, in the workshops, by definition, they're more demanding in time. They are people coming generally in person, or whether we're also doing them online. And it is a process where I think that people are spending 2 to 3 hours with us working through some of that feedback, and that's not for everyone. But also, I think, particularly for the immediate community, whereby the starting position that we're beginning from is a lower base of trust. I think it was one thing to ask people to complete a survey or to have a phone call or to answer the door when we knocked on the door. It's another thing to question whether people are going to come to a workshop, because I don't yet think they believe that there'll be an impact as a result of the consultation. I think the bereavement survivor driver is different. Our engagement with schools is different. And children and young people is in a better place. So part of it is to do with that. As a result of that, what we are planning in phase 4, so if you like, phase 1 is the mass gathering of information and feedback, and phase 2 and 3 is the sort of reflection and then model development. In phase 4, we are absolutely going to return both to workshops still, but also to a sort of survey basis approach. So every person in that area will have something through their door that lets them know what the direction of travel is, so that they can comment on it at that point. I would hope that for all of those different consultations, the uptake and the response rate will increase again. But equally, we are hearing that for some people, I think some people are anxious for us to scale with it and to see what might be available for them. And so it's about respecting that different people are interested in different things.
Thank you.
Can I top one? I don't have to. In one of the appendixes, I was just interested in terms of when you were going out to young people. One of the comments which said, when you were speaking to the older group of younger people, when they said they didn't feel the support had necessarily been as helpful as they wanted, is that for any particular reason that a specific help that they wanted it, that they didn't feel had been right yet? I was just interested in terms of how does that work in schools that they want, or
Yes, so I think partly that most of that feedback came from children and young people who were sort of 17 to 20, so sort of leaving school, coming out. And I think that when I look at the current Growth for Recovery programme, to me, that age group has always been a question mark. So we've had good support in schools, we've had decent support for adults in different environments. But I think that has always been a question. It's also generally across public service a hard group or a considered hard group to engage. And I think part of that is about how you reach out and how you demonstrate practice. But yeah, so that feedback was for health, that feedback was for us.
Yeah.
And I think we have to own that. But for example, on Tuesday night, my team spent time with at the Westfield Sports Centre with football teams who were playing, men and women, who were there to play football and to be together, which is something that they wanted to do, and they invited us to come along. And the conversation there, we were able to understand what they wanted and to understand it in more nuance. So really, the learning has been you have to try and identify opportunities where you can reach people. But I think the threshold for trust again is lower. And I think that they are looking for more support. And I think we've been able to provide today.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good to read about the, broadly speaking, success of this ongoing consultation. I wonder what learnings we sort of taken away from it, not just with future Grenfell consultations, but other consultations generally. I mean, we're not always going to have the same amount of resource for everything we consult on, but what are we taking note of those and maybe some examples of those learnings for wider consultations?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think the learnings are probably fall into a couple of different camps. So we haven't necessarily got more resource on this consultation than we might have put on others. What we have spent is more time, and time obviously is a resource in kind. And I think, it's definitely to Councillor Sinner's point, without the external scrutiny team, we would have done this process faster. And I think for some people that might be good because it would bring clarity, but for a lot of people, I think it would have prevented them from feeling like they were trusting the process because it was happening at a time that they could follow. And so I think there's definitely learning there about not rushing these processes and working with people at a time that also allows for all of their sort of complexity of normal life that people are living through. The other really significant learning though is about presence and time and sort of trying to adapt for people's lives rather than expecting people to come through our processes. So we did a significant amount of door knocking. We've done meetings. Right now in Ramadan, we're meeting in the evening meetings at 7:30 till 9:30 till 10 to try and account for people to be able to break fast. So we're trying to adjust our practice and principles to allow for people to be able to participate in the way that works for them. And the last one, which is hard, I think a hard position to learn from, but is the openness of some of the questions. So in the first phase, the vast majority of the questions that we asked were very open-ended, much like some of the Grenfell legacy conversations that we did, but where we weren't necessarily trying to consult on a preconceived idea and box people in where almost the parameters have been defined, which I think sadly isn't uncommon in public sector consultations, but we were starting from an earlier position. But that does mean that you need more time, and it does mean that you need more flexibility to be able to actually deliver on what people ask for. Which is why I think it's probably a slightly harder thing to make sure that we learn from as effectively as we might.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you wanted to add something?
I was going to say, I think the last thing you said is really important, that you aren't going in with preconceived ideas that you're trying to box people into. You're trying to say, okay, what do you really think? Because this is your future. And how can we design something which will genuinely help rather than fit into what we do as a service? I think that's the first thing I'd say. Secondly, my right, Callum, the external scrutiny team were very helpful in looking at, and they certainly did scrutinise the questions that we were going to ask to Claire's point. Because of course you're absolutely right. You get the answers back depending on what questions you ask. And I think that we found the external scrutiny team, very challenging and helpful on that. And I think the third thing I'd like to say is go back to counselling. I think we should be very thankful that people have taken such time because you're sitting around the table, you're all busy people, you're working, you've got a counsellor. Imagine if we were saying to you, great, well, we want 3 hours out of your time to really sit down and think through this. And then once you've done that, we were coming back to you saying, oh yes, and now we want to get your opinion again, and then again. So people have been incredibly generous in their time when they've got jobs and bringing up children and want to get on with their lives. So I think we should be very grateful to people.
Thank you. Greg.
Thanks very much. And well, firstly, thanks very much for the work that's gone into this, which I can see is considerable. And
thank you also for the thoroughness of the paper, which doesn't really provoke a lot of questions because it is so thorough. But because this is a public meeting, I think it's quite important to set out orally how the what the next steps are, so anybody watching can really see where we're going.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so for the different consultations, there are slightly different timelines. So for the breeding survivor consultation, we had the last phase 3 meeting last night. My team are doing one of the immediate community ones tonight, and then we've got a few more next week. One in person, I think we're going to arrange one blind, some learning that we've got from the breeding survivor one. But essentially, the education training one is a little bit later too. So that we are intending to have wrapped up phase 3 in the coming weeks, with then a bit of time to reflect, take in that feedback, think about the draft models and considerations that we were looking at, pull in all of that feedback to pull together potential draft sort of final models or final proposals, we should say, in each of those different work streams. We then do, as Elizabeth pointed to, then we then have a challenging process with the external scrutiny team, where they'll make sure that what we're proposing actually aligns with the feedback that we've heard from throughout the whole process, and that is a really positive thing. And so we're probably hopeful that we go out to consultation from the week of the 15th of April on phase 4, and then that would last through until most likely sort of through a bit of May. And then we're hoping to then wrap everything up into a final model and bring it to you on the 8th of May, as far as we've got at that stage, and then to the leadership team for final endorsement before implementation. Implementation, I think, will look different in different parts. So I think aspects of the programme we'd be able to implement potentially quite quickly. Other aspects will have much more considerable lead-in times. And part of that is difficult to determine as of yet, because we obviously don't know exactly what the final models will look like. Alongside that, I should say that the external scrutiny team, once we get to a final model stage, they will then be ramping up their consultation with the community about how to design the future scrutiny of whatever programs are established. And that will be thinking about, so do we want resident boards, or do we want partnership with academic institutions to sort of work as a couple of ideas, without, as literature ideas, who might scrutinise whatever model is put in place alongside committees like this. So that's the next few months.
Just one supplementary, if I may. I'm sure it's something you've researched. You mentioned you're going to go out on the 15th of April on phase. Are you allowed to do that in the pre-election period? Because I know there's other consultations or subjects I'm working on which require consultations where the consultation is deliberately delayed until after the elections.
As I understand it, yes, because we started and we're deep into the process, and so it's not like this is a new idea that we're putting forward. And that there is a desire for an outcome, and I think if you were to suddenly slow up because of other processes, I think that might almost be political in itself. So there's a balance.
Thank you. Darwin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. You have done a great work, and I acknowledge that the consultation really improved than before. I have seen some clients contact us and ask for support when they get conflict or survey or anything. My question is, in terms of partnership with volunteer organizations, many of them, they work and they know the needs of the people and they come to them, but there is a lack of resources to do and help it and residents with surveys and consultations so they can raise their voice. And so do you have any plans, and work with volunteer organizations, and what kind of resources and how it's possible?
Thank you, Councillor, and that aligns also to Councillor Timmer's point. So we take a slightly different approach than sometimes councils do, where we are being pretty clear that the primary group of people we are consulting with are our residents. Mm-hmm. So our voluntary sector partners absolutely are incredible partners and have been in the delivery of the rental recovery programme, but obviously across the wider council's delivery. We're definitely engaging and have engaged with stakeholders. So they've seen the processes, they've seen the models, they've seen the materials to be able to share with the residents that they support. But I think there's a distinction to be made about whether a provider is a person or an organisation that should be steering the future of spend for residents. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty difficult sometimes. But But absolutely, we've done provider workshops, we've done settings and considering about what might work, what might not work, how people have found it, and we've definitely taken advice from them about how to consult with the residents that they support so wonderfully. But it is about.
Thank you. Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think this is a very good paper, and I think you're doing some very good work here. I've just got a couple of quick questions on the thesis, on the thesis of Leave No One Behind. On page 56, bullet 4.2, you specified the 3 cohorts of people that you've been working with, and you mentioned 65% of the groups you've been contacted. Could you give me some more detail, I think, from previous meetings, how you tried to contact the other 35% who may want to be left alone? But I just want to understand the steps that you've taken to try and contact them. And because you've been able to quantify the first cohort, could you give me some idea in terms of percentages of what you've contacted in the second and the third cohort, so I can understand that sort of, if it will, where you contact them, who you've heard from?
Thank you, Councillor. So the first question is easy. So in terms of the grievance worker population that we know of, who we've been consulting with, it's around 750 people. It's the matter of 65%. And the I think it might be on 720. I should just think about the actual figures. But in terms of those response rates, what that essentially equates to is individual responses. So we've also done an analysis because we've got a good sense of who has responded, or because people have told us information about them in the anonymous section voluntarily. So we have assessed it against household. So when you do a household analysis, that figure goes up to about 85%. Because you have to acknowledge that within the 720 that we're currently supporting right now, 230 are under 18. So although we did get a good response rate between 7 and 18, we have over 100 children between 0 and 7 who obviously we haven't consulted, but they are in the percentage differential. But also from a cultural perspective, some people have chosen to respond with every adult in the household, and some people definitely haven't. So that brings the figure higher. But then also within that process of what we've attempted to do, so everybody, we have email addresses for everyone. So everyone has had short surveys, long surveys, phone calls, and only a few people have really said that they didn't want to respond at all. And obviously we've respected that distinction, but we have then kept them up to date with what findings have been. And interestingly, some of those people who didn't want to participate in the first process have now started to participate later, and they've seen the direction of travel. So yeah, I think that for us previously, since we've been running a dedicated service, the highest ever response rate we've had before was more like 40%. I think partly the motivation for previous survivors is because they're reflecting on a service that for some people they've liked, and for other people, a smaller group of people they've had challenge with. So they've had a consideration of what's at stake. So I feel quite confident that particularly through the residual processes, that we could have done much more to get a higher level there, but we'll continue to try. In terms of the immediate community, so in total there are more like 13,000 people who live within a 500 metre radius of the tower. So it's a much smaller percentage. And there are 5,000 households within that 500 metre radius. So the percentage is definitely significantly smaller. And there, I think my answer to one of the previous councillors' questions about levels of trust, levels of openness, there was a belief that anything will happen through this consultation, I think, is a motivator. The other thing also is that not everybody who lives within the 500 metre area around that immediate community necessarily wants to talk about Grenfell right now. Some people definitely do. I think partly it's to do with where people are at, partly it's to do with whether people live there at the time. Partly, I think there's still a perspective that people don't feel like they have a right to talk about it, which is something that through recognising the immediate community, we definitely want to change, because we are recognising that that is an experience that needs to be understood, and that needs to be acknowledged, and needs to be supported. But then, yeah, so there are a few different motivators. In terms of, I have to come back to you on the percentage for children and young people. What I do know is years 5 and 6 in primary school and all years in secondary school at KAA and All Saints and Holland Park were consulted and canvassed through schools. That's one of the reasons why that figure is so high. I think we've got a pretty good coverage, but I don't know how many people might not have been in that day, for example. But I can come back to you through my team. Thank you.
Thank you. One. Thank you. I was going to talk about trust. You mentioned it at one point, the trust was lowered. And I was wondering whether, I'm assuming you probably started off with a very low base of trust. Has it improved throughout the consultation? Did you see any changes?
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure. I can give an indication, but I don't think I'm the right person to make a judgment call about whether there's been an increase in trust. Not least because of the organisation that I work for, that we all represent in some way, but also because I think the trust is earned through delivery. So at this point, I think that we have seen that within the immediate community, that some people definitely seem to have felt like there's been an outcome through the process that we've been taking. And I think some of those that we've definitely seen a softening and a sort of improved relationship with people who've been attending meetings. But I think for me, it will come to how well we deliver a programme of support that is meaningful to people and then how impactful that is. So I think we're probably 18 months out before I would want to make an assessment of whether that is really truly impacting trust.
My second question, sorry, is you also mentioned earlier you find challenging decisions. And I was wondering what type of challenges were there and how did you tackle them, or how do you plan to tackle them?
So that's a great question. The challenging decisions on the horizon definitely are the fact that we've heard a really wide variety of feedback from people across all the different consultations. And through the modelling conversations, whether it's bereavement survivors and making particularly difficult decisions about quite emotional topics, or whether it's with the immediate community where there's quite a wide variety of ideas and not enough necessarily money available to be able to deliver all of them. Part of the challenging aspect of the conversations that's definitely on the immediate horizon is helping people to feel comfortable that particular ideas that they might have put forwards might not be the ones that the collective consensus or whatever form they are the ones that move forwards. So part of the approach to dealing with those challenging conversations is the efficacy of the process, which again, I'm grateful to having involvement, I'm grateful to having the EST to sort of give an objective view as to how well we're managing that. But nonetheless, whether you're thinking about change or whether you're thinking about how well you deliver on people's experiences, those are always challenging moments.
Will?
Couple of points. First of all, thank you to you, but also through you to Joe and the rest of the team. And as Elizabeth pointed out, to those who responded. I think we respect that. Great. The first question is to do with, is the NHS aligned with our consultation and including the external scrutiny? Because are they two completely separate programs, or is there going to be some co-working on the two undertakings?
Thank you, Councillor. So the NHS are not party to the EST's overview or oversight. They may choose to. They've released a document earlier this week setting out their plans for sort of co-design and consultation with the Grenfell community starting from late May, I think. But what they are doing is with the community's consent, they're observing some of our sessions, and they've had all of our material so that they can, although we're not running the processes simultaneously, that they can benefit, and then therefore the community hopefully can benefit from a reduction in sort of duplication of questions and duplication of correspondence. So it's not perfect, but we're trying to coordinate it.
Thank you. And second question is are there any issues that have been identified in children who were born after Grenfell, and how are they being assessed and supported?
I think not covered in this paper, but I know that there are papers being developed. So for children born after the fire, I think particularly depends into which household. So I know more about the experience of children born into the households of bereaved survivors. And I think that also depends about when that birth was, in terms of how soon after the fire it was, and where the family were in that position. We have always within the current dedicated service supported newborn children born into those surviving and bereaved households because of a recognition of the whole household impact of bereavement and the whole household impact of trauma, and for no fault of anyone's, but the parents' ability to be as present as they might have wanted to be to support their children as they develop. I think if NHS colleagues were here, they would say that there isn't any sort of evidence that there's definitely a distinction, but I think it's a group that we're watching, that we were trying to support and to try and wrap around and to try and provide that additionality to help ease those challenges of having a young child.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was going to ask the same sort of question as Tom about what lessons we've learned, because I think the really interesting thing about this is the iterative thing that you and Elizabeth have shown. So, you come up with a model listening to people, and then you go back and play that back to them. And actually that has quite a lot of impact when people see what you've construed from their words. And I do think that is a useful thing for us to carry through, potentially to things like, traffic surveys and other things. And so I think that this has been a useful progress. And I think what is clear from this paper is that officers have taken the advantage to learn from our outside advisors. And I think that's a really positive thing. We've had some really good comments here about how we frame questions, how we get to hard to reach groups, but I think most of those have been answered already in the paper. Sorry, Claire, did you want to add something?
Sorry, yes, I did. I just have one very discrete question, if I may.
Oh.
So in section 3.2, you mentioned challenges when individual claims are paid, and I'm wondering what those challenges you anticipate are. Section 3.2, challenges paid. 54.
So, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so the recognition through the settling of any significant number of claims is that there is, as I understand it from new colleagues, there's almost always difficulties as discrepancies between people's individual settlement amounts comes through, and between people who haven't been able to claim and those people who are able to claim. So that process of individual compensation it is to some degree inherently divisive because people aren't compensated in the same way.
It already is. I'm just not sure how this piece of work is going to mitigate that.
It's a separate position, but the idea, one of the reasons why, as I understand it, that this particular judge and judges who are overseeing the settlement of big claims do suggest that there is some broader restorative justice funding is to some extent to try and ameliorate that position. That doesn't mean that those other people are somehow settled through this process, but it is to try and recognise that the settlement process on an individual level is never perfect. And that's why I think the judge required there be some money available.
I would disagree, but thank you.
Pick that up with the judge. So I think in summary, we thought this was a very good paper. There's some very good work going on, and as I say, we had a few questions, and we're particularly anxious that we learn if the success we believe it is, that we learn from that and apply it in other spheres of the council in future. So thank you both very much for coming and answering so many questions openly. And we will now move on to agenda item, or back to agenda item 8. And thank you to Maxine, Johnny, and Sophie for allowing the legal up you down the schedule. Fine. Okay, Maxine, Johnny, what to introduce?
Sure. Well, thank you, I think, first of all, to Maxine and the other officers here, Calvin and Sophie, and everybody who's contributed to this paper. I think we've talked before in the context of outturn reports about the financial headwinds that are coming in terms of our overall budget. And that's one driver why this is a really important piece of work, but it isn't the only driver. We should also be thinking about all the time how we can improve service delivery, improve customer experience. And I think the transformation program will seek to do that. This paper, I think, sets out some of the high level themes. But definitely I would welcome challenge and questions because I think everybody on this committee has shown an interest in the subject before. And absolutely, at this stage, the plans are being formed and not a late enough stage that we would be they can't be altered or adapted to fit the context. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. I think in general terms, we're looking at some of the right areas, but I'm keen to see more detail over the coming weeks and months from officers. And I put that challenge down already, but I think it's a very good start in terms of the kind of high level thinking.
We've certainly come to the right place with challenge and questions. So if you want to add anything, unleash the challenge and questions.
Yes, just very briefly. So what we're trying to, so just something about timing. Obviously, you're looking at this kind of earlier than you would normally look at something in the budget cycle because of the scale of the challenge and because of the transformation that we want to try to achieve. It means that we wanted to both start work on this and also to get the input of this committee and others kind of before we are in a position of having to make budget choices in the autumn. So that's the first thing to say. The paper does try to cover both the kind of the transformational drive and the change and some of the context, both financial and other, that we are facing, as well as the kind of efficiency and savings drive. So there's kind of a lot in there, and as John has already alluded to, not loads of detail yet. We do have a bit more detail worked up, and as we're going through with our and I can answer questions on that, but it felt that at this stage in the process that this was about the right level of information. But to take questions, and should I also just say that Sophie, so what we've done in here is both try to describe some of the transformation work that we've already done and the kind of both the changes that has brought about and the savings that have been made. And so Sophie is here in particular because she leads the customer access strategy work, and in section 4 of the paper there's some references to that, so that if you kind of want to hear a bit more about our experience so far and what we've learned from it, then Sophie is one.
Thank you. I'm going to go around this way this time in the interest of expertise.
Thank you, Mary. It won't come as any surprise, since we made this the top or first recommendation of the budget working group, that transformations we think is absolutely essential to the council achieving, as Councillor Ferguson has put it, the dual challenges we have of financial pressures and also our commitment to being the best council. Now, the first point, it may sound nerdy or detailed or unappreciative, is that I think it's unfortunate the way the title has turned out. Because when we talked to the budget working group and when we made that recommendation, we recognise both those pressures, and savings are definitely part of it. And best council is also part of it. And the core transformations here is new working practices, raised training levels, better use of IT, and creating the opportunity for efficiencies and new ways of working in the council. I just wanted to say that, but I think that if it had been a title of transformation efficiencies to achieve savings and better customer service, or however you want to put it, nice to have customer service without the S's. That's a very key point, because it's to do with joining things up. So title important, understanding, and I think it'd be useful to have some further work done on, or maybe that make this the question: what do you understand the word transformation actually mean in terms of the organisational workings, culture, and improvement? I think that's really the fundamental point. So maybe it's a question to Maxine.
Yes. Well, look, why don't I start us on that, and then I think it isn't what you called nerdy point at all. I don't think it's so. You're absolutely right. You can't do savings and transformation at exactly the same time, because you have to do the transformation in order to deliver the savings, save the money, and that's one of the things that we've certainly found in the customer access work. The point of trying to start this earlier and come here earlier is to try and is to do some of that work where we are trying some things. And so, for example, next month in April, we are going to launch our recruitment challenge, which essentially is looking at, it's not a recruitment freeze, which you hear about in some of the more cash-strapped authorities, but we are really going to be looking at every single vacancy that we're recruiting to and say, do we need to do this, with an aim of reducing the number of recruitments that we're doing. Now, you might say that's not hugely transformational, but what it is it allows us to test out, rather than just when someone leaves, you automatically replace them. Let's challenge ourselves to say, well, should we be doing something differently in that team, in that service? So that's going to be done at the departmental level across the council. So, but the idea that essentially transformation has to happen to drive out savings, and we're trying to do a number of things here. We're trying to do becoming the best, the culture change that is driven by the learning from Grenfell, at the same time as the efficiency, technology-enabled efficiency, and other type of efficiency, like the use of our estate, which we can also talk about, which to drive out savings. And it is a challenge. It is a challenge to do all of those things at the same time.
I think that the light bulb moment for me this week is when I heard an early years teacher talk about trying to bring some intermediate level services, not acute, not general provision services, in a 9 months to 3 provisions.
Yeah.
And making the case for the NHS for support for those services. And she'd done the research to show points of improvement that child would achieve over the next 10 years through primary education, and showing that it would prevent, or most likely prevent, more expensive services having to come to their later date, and better health and well-being opportunities, life chances for that child. It probably would make the difference between a special school stay for the rest of their life, institutionalised, and then going to general provision and actually becoming self-sufficient. For the individual concerned, that was a life-changing opportunity. But for society generally, it was a hell of a lot cheaper. If we can do that through new ways of working, and there was a great deal of resistance at first in NHS until people engaged with it, and then there's been some real thinking on that. And I understand some of that thinking has been fed back even up to the ministerial level with the intermediary period. So that what we're looking for in transformations, not salami slicing and program slippage, which is, I did that in Blackpool once upon a time many years ago. So I'm well used to that. I know it works in a certain context, but this is not what we envisage for the project. So if you disagree with that cultural change request, please say so. If you agree with it, please embrace it.
Yeah, happy to embrace it. What I would just say is, I'm just going to give you an example of in our children's services at the moment, the systemic practice approach that they take to children's social care is, evidence shows, is one of the factors why we only have 90 looked after children in our services with high numbers. So we've done, there's that prevention there. So obviously then we need to be looking at more opportunities, not just that one, but what else can we do at prevention, which will prevent other areas. And I think Callum wanted to come in on that point.
Yeah, no, thank you. Actually, I think section 4.8 recognises that focus in the second bullet point, and it may be that it's not a sufficient, it doesn't have sufficient examples to process that through. But I think what we are trying to set out in the paper is to recognise that within our borough there are a range of different experiences, and becoming the best for those different experiences needs to be acknowledged. And there is something about focusing on those people who have a specific need from the council, and whether that might be the example that you gave, or it might be people who are living in deprivation in parts of the borough in social housing. That actually, by thinking about who our customer base is, who our resident base is, and thinking about how we better serve them, I think that is part of there's a higher level principle, and I completely accept that it's clear that you and perhaps the committee want to see a greater level of detail in terms of some examples of where what that principle applied might lead to. But I don't think we're on. I think we're on the same page.
Thank you. Well, thank you. In your earlier discussion with Will, you mentioned something about recruitment.
Mhm.
And and here on page 46, one of the rationales you have about staffing is you say you have a high level, you have a higher number of staff in ratio to residents.
Yeah.
And I'm why are we recruiting if we already have a high number of staff that we are trying to find a way to reduce that number? So why are we? Isn't there any way you can, mesh them together?
Yeah, so-
merge them. And my other thing is, where is the surplus of staffing? And that on this high level, where is the area that you have the highest level of staffing, or is it spread evenly overall?
Mhm. Yeah. So that's the second point. I think if we knew exactly where we had a high level of staffing, then it was necessary, we would be, that would be straightforward. It tends to not be quite straightforward as that. On the first point, the recruitment challenge. So if when people leave, you just don't recruit to those posts, then you can get quite uneven. So, for example, there is a higher turnover of staff in some areas of social care, in housing on trades such as plumbing, carpentry, electrical. And so if all we did was say, right, we're just not recruiting anymore, when somebody leaves, somebody else will have to do that job, then we would be exposing some areas to risk of service reduction and residents not getting what they need and potentially things not being safe. So that's why we're trying to take a sort of intelligent approach to saying, do you really need that job? And the challenge is going to come, and the targets will be set for departments to reduce their. So there will be that case for some jobs, but it needs to be reduced. In answer to your question about staffing levels, and this is something that Johnny and I and other members of the leadership team discussed. It is, so we've got 2,700 staff. We've got 143,000 residents. We're 4.7 square miles. The other boroughs, when I ask colleagues in other boroughs, it's always difficult to do a direct comparison. For example, our waste collection is outsourced, but our housing management is insourced, and but essentially, boroughs with higher levels of need and bigger populations have staff. Most councils do have more staff than us. In fact, I think all councils, as far as I know, have more staff than us. But proportionately, they have exactly. Johnny.
Yeah.
So
I think it's a good challenge, and staffing's going to be pretty critical to transformation because of that ratio. Identifying where we can make progress with that is what's going to take a bit of time. There are some areas where it probably will be relatively straightforward. There are other areas where it's more complex, and you've got to think about the level of service you want to give as well. So, for example, in some of the really outstanding services that we give, and you look at it in FCS, we might, for example, have a lower ratio, caseloads in terms of kids for social workers, etc., might be pretty similar. So yeah, I think it's a layered issue, but one that we absolutely has to be central.
Well, do you want another question? So I just want clarification. Why is it difficult to find where exactly you have the surplus?
So picking up on Johnny's point, so I know we have more social workers here per child than pretty much any other borough, but we also have less children in who are looked after. To Will's point, so question for us on that will be, and I'm only taking that as an example, but should we reduce the number of children's social workers? And it may be that we should reduce them somewhat, with alongside a further preventative offer. That's the kind of package, but it's not. So that's what I mean.
So did you use the children's services deliberately because I asked the question?
Yeah, I did.
I was following up Johnny's. And things like our. So let me take another example. Our digital service.
has at the moment got, and in fact, one of the proposals from resources is to reduce the number of people in the digital service. But we've not long disaggregated from Westminster Council. And in so doing, there are still some, and actually, I think the service has done that transition pretty smoothly. They're also heavily involved in the ERP programme. So we will want to reduce their headcount, definitely. But at the moment, it probably makes sense that we have got more people in digital than you might use in a run of the month business. Plus, we want them to do some of the AI stuff that we want to introduce.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. Top of page 46, just looking at Havering Council, where 70% of their budget goes on social care and SEN. Where you've got the paragraph table 1, where you looked at what you called the worst case scenario, you considered funding stops from central government, but you haven't considered necessarily in these figures where the demand-led services continue to spike and go up, as in sort of a Havering scenario. So you've called it worst case scenario. So my two questions are, if our demand-led services continue to grow, irrespective of central government funding, won't the figures behind this? Because that's what they would.
Yes.
And then secondly, if they would be higher, to what extent do we want to make sure that the 114 won't be put in place here because we run out of money to pay for demand-led services, for example?
I mean, the intention of showing a range like this is to show a kind of reasonable spectrum of outcomes. It's true that you could compound risks. So you could have the entire social care grant falling away and a resurgence in inflation and industrial action all at once.
Which would be the prudent route to go, because you've got to consider that those things may happen.
Yeah, I mean, there is a judgment to make about what the prudent approach is. Were we to do that, you could quite quickly have a budget gap of double this. I don't mean that flippantly, but in the sense that, I mean, clearly, if inflation was to return to 11% and that hit our contracts, that would very quickly have an impact. You then have to balance how likely are these things, and that's a judgment. You've got to manage how prudent it would be to budget on the basis of that compounding of risk. Because if it doesn't arise, you will have pared back services much more than you otherwise might have done, and in a way that you didn't need to, and that would have outcomes for residents. So I think what this table sought to show is the social care grant is the biggest known unknown. It's the biggest known variable. This therefore shows the impact were it all to be taken away. As it happens, personally, I think it's probably pretty unlikely it would all fall away, certainly in one go. It's possible they might phase it down, it's possible they might extend it, but this is kind of designed to say, well, okay, if some of those risks arise, this is the sorts of figure we might be looking at. And it will evolve over the course of the year. So, inflation figures month on month, or as contracts come up, that will affect the budget gap. And we can see that what was £23 million a few months ago in terms of the next financial year is now 19. Some of that is because of the great work we've already done in terms of looking at the capital programme, which you should all commend on this committee. But other things are also that the economic outlook changes over time. And so I think that's how I would present the way these figures have been arrived at.
Probably can't mention the fall in inflation during the pre-election.
What I can say is that we have got a fantastic government in place at the moment that has done a brilliant job in reducing inflation at a kind of rate of knots over the past few months.
And then,
We are the pre-election.
just finish my final question.
Yes.
Is what's the biggest risk that keeps you up at night in terms of
For me, it's probably TA in terms of the revenue budget. As I say, I mean, and one could have different perspectives on how likely it is the entire social care grant will fall away, and were that to happen, that would clearly be really, really significant. So certainly, if that arises, it becomes the more. But I think right now, if you look at our outturn in Q3, and we were going through this last night at leadership, the overspend that we have across the council is smaller than the overspend in homelessness and TA. In other words, the rest of the council is basically in balance. It's in the traditional position. The finances are working as they should, but there is this kind of really difficult upsurge in terms of TA costs. The stat that I told us off about and that came out of it, I think London councils at the end of Q3 were £150 million overspent in TA in this financial year. That is an enormous amount. We're about £3 million over, and that's for a variety of reasons. One of which is that our prevention work is in the top 3 in London, and actually that's being assessed all the time. So we're doing good work there, but it's nevertheless a huge risk right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Garvin, do you have any questions on this paper? No? Greg?
I'm happy.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, if I was writing a statement of high-level principles, I would be thinking about concentrating on the council on statutory requirements, core commitments, and universal services, which is what this paper effectively says. I would also be considering very carefully discretionary activities with a view to stopping them altogether. That can be very controversial, but that's what I've been. That's where I would be looking, and I'll be examining overheads very carefully, and you've said that tonight, but including council facilities and supports. So I would be thinking support staff much more ahead of social workers who are frontline delivery services. So I think the example that was used earlier was probably not the one I would have wanted to hear, but nevertheless, I understand where you were.
Yeah, I think the intention was that it's illustrative in the sense that it shows how the ratios work.
I understand that, and I think I would have preferred an illustration that involved support staff, but I understand exactly where you were coming from, because I think if we were reducing staff, I would be looking at overhead staff, not delivery as the first port of call. But I do completely get the point you were making, and I think the paper, not in the same words, says basically what I've just said. And I welcome the fact that you're going to come back with the detail, but that's really what I want to see is the detail. And this paper doesn't have any it's high level principles. I really want to see where we're going. I can certainly see opportunities with facilities. It's not only obvious on the beginning days of working. This building is not as well as it was when you would remember it from your previous term, Maxine. So, for example, I mean, there's lots of examples like that. So perhaps I'd leave that with you as the challenge. Feel free to come back to me.
I'm happy to assure you that I think our intention would be not to rationalise frontline staff as a first port of call. That's kind of a last resort. So you're right that there are probably better examples. I think for clarity of illustration, it was a useful one, but I accept the point that it's not the sort of example we want to take forward in practice. So that's the initial piece is frontline shouldn't be the first port of call.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, services to. So clearly, our first priority is services to residents. So, and everything else needs to follow from that. I was going to suggest another example, and also it might be useful to use Sophie. So when we bring in the our new ERP system, then that both makes analytics much easier about where you're spending money and on what, but also it does enable a lot more self-serve, and so will reduce the requirement, particularly on finance and HR. So in terms of those kind of backup, bringing in those systems which will enable and support staff, a reduction in support staff is absolutely there. In terms of the detail on some of the programmes, so it is always a difficult balancing act, isn't it? So how well things are developed, where there hasn't necessarily, on staffing, for example, been an enormous amount of staff consultation yet at this point, and we are much earlier in the cycle, not even yet in the beginning of the financial year 24-25, to be talking about detailed numbers. We do have some indicative numbers on some of these areas, and in exactly your point of, what's the opportunity to maybe let out space in some of our operational buildings, use operational buildings in a different way. And there are some of those things which would have no service impact at all, which therefore wouldn't necessarily, require anything enormously detailed, but then anything which has got a change in service just means that we need to consult on it. And so there is there is, there are things that are in development that are probably not quite ready to bring to you yet as a committee, but that we will be able to do so. I don't know certainly if I'm.
Poor Sophie, she's here and nobody's asked her a question, and I'm not going to ask it. Well, so I think, kind of reflecting on all the points you've made so far, the work we're doing in the programme, and that's kind of led to some really good successes, is to think more about processes than people, because one follows the other. And what you find when you dismantle and look at a process that has been there for 100 years and everyone does without thinking about it, is there are usually a number of things that throw up inefficiencies. There'll be some kind of duplication, people doing similar things to each other. There'll be some kind of automation that's missing, so there's manual handoffs and people are getting shunted around here, there and everywhere. And there's something about demand management that creates demand, either unnecessary demand, avoidable contact, or actually is it preventative enough to avoid the contact in the first place. And once you identify those things, you are in a space of a win-win for both the resident who is accessing that service and the organisational efficiency, because those things are pain points for people who are delivering the services and for people who are receiving them. So the example I would give is council tax, which is a frontline service. And the reason I took a look at it in that way, dismantled the process and kind of assembled it, was because we were seeing the backlog of work go up and up. Wait times were more than we wanted them to be, and complaints are coming through. So we did that process review, looked at the process, and what we found was all of those issues are happening, and actually the contact we were receiving, over 50%, I think there's something like 58%, was what we described as failure demand, where people were phoning not because they needed something, but because they hadn't got what they needed already, and phoning back again and again and again. And we kind of realised that was because some of the functions were sitting across two different teams, and so people were having to phone back and speak to someone else about something. And so we reconnected those teams. We've introduced some different work. We've stopped having some people do one thing and people do another, so that when someone comes, their issue is resolved immediately. Just this month, we've got down to 0 backlog. We had a huge backlog. Complaints have absolutely nosedived, and we've seen wait times go right down. So now we will start to get into the cycle of being able to look at, actually, can we really, do we need as many posts as we did before? Now we've cleared that backlog. So that's a kind of example, I think, where you look at a process rather than people, and the rest follows. And you can find those places where it works for residents and it works for the organisation as well. Thank you. That's a really helpful explanation. Tom.
Thanks, Mary. My question is about the digital transformation. I think there's a recognition here that it is not just important but central to transformation. And I appreciate we don't have the detail yet necessarily of exactly what that'll look like. But there's a risk, I think, with ERP system implementations. I mean, there's lots of risks, but there's a risk. I'm not an expert, but I have seen it in other businesses where the ERP, in this case Oracle, but it doesn't matter who it is, salesman will say, oh, we've got a module for this, a module for that, a module for the other. If you have quite a risk-averse IT team, which most IT teams tend to be, and particularly when there's talks of cost cutting, people worry that, oh no, we shouldn't go out and buy new software or invest in new software, new technology to do X, Y, Z, because the ERP system can do that. There's a feel, oh, we'd be wasting money. But actually, for true digital transformation, you need the best technology that is specialist in that area. And while you need an ERP system, absolutely, it isn't the sort of hammer to bang all nails with. There is an important role, I think, for specialists piece of software. So I suppose the question is, are we aware of that risk, and do we have people in there who are maybe slightly less risk averse, who are sort of specialists driving digital transformation?
I've got a glutton question for Sophie.
I'm on the digital board. I'm not responsible for digital services, but I think I probably can answer some of those questions. So absolutely, our principle in our digital strategy is to use the right tool for
for the job. I've been in organisations that over bespoke systems because they think they can stretch them to do everything. That doesn't work because you end up with a system that can't be maintained, and also all your risk is in one provider, which is not where you want to be. So I think the digital strategy that we have and the way we approach these programs and implementations is always to make sure we're using the right tool for the job, and that we don't create a system that is so difficult to maintain that actually very quickly, it costs more than it would have done. In the ERP, absolutely those principles are in place, and we've got a number of specialists who are advising us on the programme who have implemented the solutions before and are looking at how we make sure we adapt our processes to suit the solution so it doesn't become over customised and very difficult to maintain, but also that it interfaces and integrates with other systems that do what they do equally well and don't need to be replaced. So it is about making the best use of the tools we've got, but not pretending that you can replace everything with one solution. This is designed to do a number of things very well, and that's what it will be used to do. And in terms of making sure that we're not, I suppose, risk averse, I think we've got an opportunity as an organisation to use the example of many other authorities that have gone before in a number of these implementations we're doing. And we're working to do that, visiting other local authorities that have got similar solutions in already, looking at what they've developed and reusing technology that's already been developed, and those enhancers or accelerators that they kind of are known because they've been developed by other authorities. So that's one of the ways in which we can really make good use of where others have tried for us and reduce our risk but still be ambitious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lucy?
Yes, I've got 2 questions on 4 and 2 on 5, but I'll be very quick. The first was on 4.10, which states that in setting board ambitions for residents, we sometimes spread effort across too wide a range of programmes and initiatives, diluting the focus on outcomes. And it was just on how can the council put service users, carers and families at the heart of defining what improved outcomes look like as part of the transformation. And then also in the Social Care Committee on the 12th of October, we discussed home care transformation and pilot for outcomes, focused commissioning and moving away from tiny task home care commissioning. Are there plans for more of these pilots in the future on that focus on outcomes? I don't mind if you can't be honest tonight.
Thank you. So on the first point, I think definitely the idea that sort of spreads through section 4 of the paper is to try and recognise those different experiences perhaps better than we have. We have a very varied resident base in this borough, and I think that we haven't always spent as much time seeing that. So there are families, there are children who've got specific needs, as Councillor was saying before. There are significant differences in the amount of the poverty people are facing, the challenges people are facing. And I think what we have to do to try and do this transformation effectively, so it's not just about savings, and it's not just about improved business practice, which is absolutely fundamental, but it's also about how we better serve the needs of all of our residents. And for us to do that, your example of families, children, and young people, we have to recognise their different experiences, recognise that our aspiration for becoming the best for those different people means different things, and we have to know what those residents' experiences are and be able to have that right at the centre of our thinking. In terms of the home care transition, absolutely, I know that well. And yeah, I think to Sophie's point and to others, I think those will be, as we flesh out what this looks like in terms of how we use digital platforms, how we think more intimately about people's individual experiences, then I'd be very surprised if there weren't more examples.
I've got 2 quick questions on section 5, which is one on prevention, which can obviously reduce savings by upstreaming interventions and avoiding more costly social care packages later on. Will there be transformation work stream on prevention to reduce costs in the long run? And then also on RBKC Home, which we spoke about at one of our committees, and is one of the largest transformation projects in ASC, 2.1 million in savings. So just a question on how we're ensuring it's on track across the year for assurance, and is the corporate centre of work closely working with departments to monitor the delivery of those savings?
Yeah, I'll pick that up. So you're talking about savings that are in the current 12.5 million that we're delivering in this year, and those are two examples. And the short answer is yes, we are tracking those through our management team and through departmental finance meetings. And as you would see in previous years, the kind of quarterly monitor will, and this committee has really interrogated that. Quarterly monitor has a report on which savings are on track and which savings are not on track. I think those, at this point, I think those are well prepared and well planned for those particular savings that you mentioned. But yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, is anyone measuring the impacts on service delivery of potential staff reductions? Because I am seeing concerns in certain areas like housing licensing, where you can cut a certain amount of that, but when you get on the phone, then actually the service starts to suffer. If you take away the resilience from the teams because you're not really staffing or where you have the turnover, then you're going to increase your turnover, you're going to reduce your resilience again, and services are going to suffer. And in something statutory about licensing, there is nowhere to go. So I just wondered, is anyone actually looking at that in terms of the impacts or potential impacts? Is anyone modelling that? And also whether there is perhaps some learning from Callum's work with the consultation in terms of listening to feedback from senior staff in terms of any concerns they may have about impacts.
Yeah, I'll pick that up. If there's a specific concern about licensing, I'd really like to hear about it. So please do let me know. So, so every time we do a restructure or a change in service, we have to do an equalities impact assessment, and that is essentially looking at the impact to residents. If it is a service change, we are statutorily required to consult on it. So when you see those things, though, then the really important thing is to come back to it after it's done. So within environment and neighbourhoods, we have had some really significant restructures that have delivered £700,000 worth of staffing savings, which were part of the previous 2 year staffing savings. So I think that's a good challenge to come back and say, well, how is that going in licensing? So that's licensing is where that service sits. Looking at a kind of private sector licensing, of course, everyone will know about the focus on kind of standards in private sector housing at the moment. So yes, and I'm more than happy to go away and look at that. We do, in terms of like, do we have places for people to bring concerns about pressure on service delivery? So we have a senior managers forum, which is, so obviously each department has their heads of service meetings. I hold a senior managers forum, which is all the directors and heads of service together. The purpose of that is to, obviously we're not always looking at the impact of savings, but the purpose of those sessions are to create the kind of dialogue and sense of one team that means that we can have healthy challenge. And as we get deeper into these harder savings, we will have to have more of a focus on that through that process.
Thank you, because I do have concerns not just about licensing, also in terms of what I'm seeing about adult social care and housing. And if you remember, there was, I think, in housing needs, some posts reduced in previous budgets this year. And then we started to look at actually where the complaints are rising. The biggest rise, of course, was in that particular part, which had a reduction. So I would be concerned that there is monitoring in place pre-decision making and also post.
I think our complaints process procedures spelling.
Page 45. Point A about the abbreviation words. It was not mentioned about cold work, and also there is an error score. There is a high level of abbreviation for residents living there. But I don't know when this was right. It was not mentioned cold work, which has a high abbreviation and also error score.
Thank you, Councillor. The list on 4.8 isn't meant to be exhaustive. I think where we've tried to highlight particular experiences is in those wards that are the highest in terms of the wards within the borough, in terms of level of deprivation. Colville is definitely experiences that we wanted to pay attention to. So it isn't to suggest that those residents' needs wouldn't be prioritised. It's more of an example of the same to the experience that we know is occurring in our school.
Sorry, one more question. Yeah, I haven't finished. So I just wanted to ask about the learning from Grenfell, which we see very frequently referred to in papers such as this. And I'm just wondering, yet is there anywhere where that's been formally pulled together? Because if you're going, it's one thing to put in place a program of transformation. If you want to utilise learning, it would be really good to be able to know what that was. And I'm sure that there's lots of different pieces of learning across lots of different work streams. And I just wonder if that's actually been formally pulled together or if it's a phrase.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's definitely, it exists in different formats and it exists in different reports. Of course, it doesn't exist, and we use different parts of that learning for different aspects. And I think learning from Grenfell is embedded in this paper in terms of the prioritisation of those residents who haven't always been recognised by this council in terms of needing that additional support. And the hope is, as this programme develops and those principles are already embedded, then I think that commitment to ensure that we see and treat all of our residents who need us most in the way that best serves them, I think that is a fundamental learning from Grenfell.
I think it is, but I also think it's implicit, and it seems to be implicit in every paper. And when you talk about principles, if there are principles, it would be really nice, I think, to make them explicit. I'd like to suggest that should be done, because otherwise you can't measure your progress against it. If you don't know if you've changed, if you haven't actually set your starting point and you haven't set your goals, and if there is learning, then it's never actually operationalised anywhere formally. Nobody can refer to it. Nobody can actually be guided by it. So I would suggest that it's actually quite important, especially now that we're 6 years on. We've had quite a lot of time to start pulling that together, where there is learning, and to see how any attempts to use that learning so far been working out. I would expect by now, at least, to be seeing something rather more explicit. I mean, that's not just specific to this paper, but across the council. Okay. Sorry, did Sophie want to say?
So do you want another?
Well, I just thought Sophie had a hand up.
Sophie and then Greg, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I suppose I was just thinking kind of one of the ways that that's kind of materialised into something very tangible. And this is just one example of where it was done in many places is through our service standards, which is another piece of work we've done through the programme, where that is absolutely driven by learning from Grenfell, that we then co-produce service standards with residents, which are now thank you, which are now we've now got a whole implementation programme around, and that's something really solid and tangible that will transform the organisation. That's what it's designed to do. So I think it is implicit, but it's also making its way into the mechanics of the organisation, not just sitting in kind of reports that we can pull off every now and then and read. And I think that's really, really important as part. And I think that's kind of really good challenge to us in this transformation about how do we make sure that's happening for everything that we do.
I mean, I do see the transformation and I do see the learning practice, but I don't see anywhere tracking that.
Slightly apart from this paper, but there is a general suggestion which no doubt Johnny will transmit to the leadership team of a paper on that school. Greg.
Thank you. Just picking up on a couple of Claire's earlier points and supporting them. Firstly, the licensing question, it came up in the licensing committee and the action was on, I think it was the committee chair to bring the point of concern to both the executive director.
Okay.
So whether it's been done or not, I don't know, but the executive director should.
Yeah,
should
I'll
know
follow that
about
up.
it.
Thank you.
On the housing needs question, I think that's a good one to discuss because earlier you had an example of with looked after children where the social worker ratio was a very high one comparatively, and it's an example where we're well supplied like that. But housing needs is not one of those areas on the council, and I do support Claire in what she just said, but I think a good transformation programme could potentially create headroom to invest in the areas which are universal services, areas of high need, which is statutory services where we do need to be delivering for residents. And that would strike me as being an area that we probably ought to think about. But well, we obviously have to create the headroom first by the transformation process. So I realise that that's the first bit of the challenge. The second bit of the challenge is to think about where we need to be investing.
Thank you. And what do you want to make a quick?
Yeah, very brief, just to say that we need to be very careful to balance general provision, intermediary and severe needs. Because if we don't invest sufficiently in the lower levels of need, there's much greater expense up the needs triangle. It's a very difficult balance for that.
I just wanted to make the point that I was a bit disappointed in the section called Principles for Future Transformation, because I didn't think those principles were very clear. I think I was expecting to see things like prevention, self-service, statutory services, better use of estate as the principles from which we're working. And I think if we articulated those more clearly, everything else would probably make more sense and flow more logically. And I think we ought to, as we set off on this journey, have a very clear set of principles that we discuss and debate. Because I think, those are themes that have come up here: prevention, the tension between prevention and staff numbers, and the tension between staff numbers and resilience. And all of those things need to be part of our thought process, I think, and things that we can measure stuff against. I also just wondered whether we'd thought about doing some isolated or sporadic zero-based budgeting around the organisation as part of a different way of looking at some of our budgets. Obviously, it's an expensive, resource-intensive process, but it can throw up some interesting ideas. And then finally, about Sophie talked. I love the idea of picking aside processes and cutting out the fat out of them. The completely unnecessary stuff that annoys residents as much as it costs money. But maybe we should be setting ourselves targets, the number of processes that we're reviewing, and having some kind of that'd be something that we could really. It's just an easy one to follow and track. But those would just be my observations. My particular concern is about having a clear set of principles to set out on this, or as we set out. I think we've had a very exhaustive discussion of this, and I think that's because everybody's really interested in this subject, because we all think it's very important. Because without transformation, any cuts are going to be blunt and more blunt and painful than they need to be. So I hope you have taken away some of the concerns that the committee has articulated. I think I've articulated them roughly to you, and thank you very much for coming and spending quite so long with us and answering everything so clearly.
Thank you.
And we'll see it again. We'll see another iteration later today. Thank you. Okay. We turn to item 6. We're getting too far off this. The political plan for civils, as usual, in order to maximise our chances of pre-decision and scrutiny, either by circulation or in committee. So, on the leadership team, did anyone think of those we need to look at that we haven't?
Yes, page 3.
Yep.
Options for vacant ground required properties doesn't seem to have a scrutiny section, and probably ought to.
We've spoken to officers about that in anticipation. I think Clary had mentioned that you wanted to look at that. Claire might have mentioned
Yes,
it the last
I think
meeting.
it came up with the previous meeting.
Yeah, so we can circulate it or we bring it to a committee.
If it's going to the leadership team on the 4th of July, we can ask if the paper would be ready for your June meeting.
For the housing meeting.
Oh, for housing, yeah.
Okay,
I'm not sorry, I can't remember the meeting dates, but we'll just think about time. Yeah. Okay.
I guess there's a choice because it's a granted subject, and therefore this committee has oversight. So there's a legitimate reason for bringing it here, but on the other hand, you might not want to have because it's quite a detailed.
It's quite detailed. I would say it's more of a housing. It's a bespoke secretary.
We could do it out of committee online.
It's kind of expertly done through. Okay. Then page 4, actually, just so 5. 6. 7. Renewal characters.
Yeah, they're, I'm that's
8.
Yeah, on 8, the issuing of the PSPO in Earls Court. So no, that's in
That was discussed here when we looked at the council approved for action.
Yeah,
And I think from memory, the committee wanted to look at it after it had been implemented to see how it was working.
that probably makes more sense.
Okay, let's leave that like that. And remember to stick it on the future work programme for environment. Page 9.
I'm not sure if the award of contract for phase 2 works for the Kensington Electric Academy. Do we have a date for that now? Because there seems to be. Sorry, which page are we on?
Page 9. Page 9. The first.
Yeah, I think that there's a report due on that. So we can ask to have the report circulated.
Yes, I think that's the circulation one.
Yeah. I think we will get, you get the councillor emails. Okay. I think there's one due to be coming out to members of the committee about that KD either tomorrow or Monday. Yeah. So I was discussing that with colleagues today. So yes, you will get the email if you want to look at it. That's better if you can do that.
9, 10.
Sorry, 9 and 10. It's not really my area, but the youth club extension of contract to youth clubs, and then also out of school learning, which affects youth clubs as well. Just speaking to the youth club in my ward, there's concern that those grants keep on just getting frozen, and with high inflation and massively cutting into their abilities to deliver services, and also they get told the time at which they're told what their contract award will be. It's like just before they have to start delivering, so they're not being given enough notice as well. So it might be an area where it's worth doing a bit of scrutiny.
Not necessarily relating to this KD, which is a simple extension, but about the youth groups in general.
Yeah, although the extension might be, another 2 years, paying you not factoring in inflation and paying you the same as.
I think it says they're being recommissioned in February next year.
Okay.
But Wally, you've got an item, haven't you, on youth services on your next agenda? Yeah. So it could get into that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for picking that up, Tom. 10.
Going forward, 10, 11, 12. Sorry, I think I might have come in from the ahead. I'm on 11.
Really ahead of us
Yes,
all.
sorry.
Right. Everybody else might have to go to the next one.
So 11 and 12.
Yes.
We seem to have quite a lot of procurement. And a lot of it's relating to the East West refurbishment. And there is a degree of resident concern around that.
So what do you want to do about it?
So I'm wondering whether as an item it should come to my committee, not necessarily in relation to specific one of these key decisions, but around that this work.
So something on procurement and
Something on
Contract.
refurbishment of East West.
So progress, including procurement, but possibly just it's.
Well, in advance of the
Consultation.
procurement, or it might be useful to hear some specific update from.
Okay, so
so-
I need you to liaise with Jackie about the
Have a chat.
ingredients
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah,
report.
thank you.
That's all right, but
Does Greg
absolutely
think
no.
that sounds sensible?
Yeah, no, we could do, yes. So, there's a department that does procurement, as we heard in here, specifically in the housing department. So something from them to say how they undertake their duties and what are their challenges and risks would be a good paper for the next municipal, yeah, because there's always a lot of these in housing. I mean, this is not an unusual sector. Yeah.
Page 13. 14. 15. Sorry?
What I mean.
16. Yeah. 17. 18.
I raised one on 18.
Yeah.
Second, that's the first one. It's got transfer of homes to council ownership. It says to approve terms of transfer ownership of a number of homes of registered provider. Pretty vague.
The first, Claire and I are getting brief, a private brief on that one.
Right, because it's confidential.
It's quite sensitive. It's apparently quite sensitive to the residents. So we're getting private brief next month.
Right.
And then you'll have a view on
And then
what
we
you
want
want
to
to
do
do.
on whether we want to call it.
Okay, well, that's
Thank you very much.
comforting. Thank you.
18, the transfer of homes into council ownership. Does it mean,
That's what we were just discussing.
That's the one we were talking about.
okay,
She's like,
maybe
Started saying, does it mean? Maybe she had a question.
Well, I think there's a confidential briefing on what it's actually about.
Yeah,
Yeah, I suspect it probably won't get further than that.
I think the briefing's to find out if you think it needs further scrutiny, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
18, 19. 20. Everyone.
On 21, the 5-year sports agreement for delivery of Notting Hill Carnival that overlaps this committee and environment.
I know you've
Seems-
taken an interest in the carnival. Do you want to
Yeah.
have a look at that?
Yeah, so I think so. I mean,
It
either,
would be your committee for this one.
Yeah.
Overview looks more at the community safety aspects of
which
carnival.
wouldn't really come into, the delivery.
And I know
So,
you've done some work on this already.
so yeah, I think that'd be a good one to look at. Thank you.
Okay. That's 21. So we move on to 22. 23. 24. 25. 26. 27.
I asked one about the acquisition of property to enable
Yeah.
use of respite, crisis support, a kind of borough commissioning fund. Is that something that we need to do? And one of the,
Things with council. You know, so
I think,
is it another confidential one?
I think if I had to guess, that might be Kingswood House.
Yeah.
But I don't.
should we find out a bit more about
There
that?
was an email about that the other day, but it's not
Yeah,
completely clear.
My particular concern about that is what kind of respite, because one of the things that Leslie Watson and Carol West has said about discharge is that the problem they've got is that when they have elderly people who are physically able to leave us, but also have dementia, they have no ability to discharge them.
Actually, I don't know.
Is it to do with that, or is it to do with other things?
Well, that's normally the princess. Anyway, okay, let's have a look and find out more
Yeah.
about that. And I'm sure all raised and better about hospital discharge. Page 27, 28.
I don't know, on 28, it's making a bid for the Notting Hill police station is quite a major thing to do, and making sure that council has all that's enough thrown. What are we going to spend on it? What are we
Obviously, we
bid
don't have
for
any
it?
money.
Yeah, what are we
So I
going to
think
do with
probably
them?
whenever this happens, it'll be an urgent key decision, won't it?
I think it will be an urgent key decision because the council will have to move quickly if it's a purchase.
But
And it's
presumably,
This paper won't appear until it's.
no, this has been on for a long time. This KD, since the mayor announced it.
Okay.
So yeah, I think
presumably quite a bit of thinking's gone on as to what we'd spend, what we'd do with it, that sort of thing.
we can find out more. There has been liaison with officers over time. I can't remember all the details.
So I think this the key decision is not something to bring to committee because it won't exist until the last minute. But the principles around what we'd pay for it and what we do with it.
Yes.
Probably do need some kind of, I'm not sure if it's a whole paper, and also we probably don't want to show our hand too clearly. We don't want to say how much we'd be in public, how much we'd be payments.
More.
Yes,
Perhaps there could be a brief.
yes, maybe.
That's briefing, yeah, that's a good idea, yeah.
And those to keep anything out of the public committee, but then that's commercially sensitive information. And of course, what we do with it is an integral part of what you pay for it. So,
Yeah.
it's tricky. Okay. So, Scrutiny work program, that we all comfortable with that, unless anything last minute.
I guess
Good.
what I would make is that, question to Johnny really is, do you have to wait till the 8th of May to get a response from you on the recommendations to the budget working group?
Well, that's the next meeting,
Yeah,
and
just,
that's why we penciled it in for that meeting, and usually the response.
I mean, if officers have drafted something and I see it and signed up, I'm happy to kind of send it line sooner.
yeah, I mean, if you could send it for, rather than bring it just to the meeting where we get it 1 week in advance. All select committees did a lot of work. And then,
As long as I see the responses before they are published, then I'm happy to.
Yeah, you would have to agree them as
Yeah,
a member, so
Yeah.
you can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a request for change of program, it's a request for pre-circulation.
Well, yeah, well, when they happy to
Yeah, right.
circulate, yeah.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Can I just ask though, did you want, usually we do the annual scrutiny with the borough commander, and I made a suggestion you might want to do that in July, did it in September last year. It looked like there was space in the July meeting, and the reason I was asking this evening is to get time in the diary.
Why don't we do that? Because she couldn't come, did she, in
No.
September, so
No.
it's not feeling too close, not feeling too,
Yeah.
whatever. Okay, in the absence of any urgent business, we don't have an open. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And